Join the revolution starting inside. An instrumental part of Agora worldwide. Agora worldwide. Agora worldwide. Counter economics. Agorist strip. Black market click. Move a quick flip. Can't regulate this. Agorist strip. Black market click. Move a quick flip. Can't regulate this. Agorist.
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 Nexus. Agorist.
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 This is Brandon with the Agorism Nexus podcast. I've got Tom TechLibre here with me. Super excited to have him on. He lives in Peru. Very interesting guy. We've done a project together, the 3D printed documentary. He narrates it, and he also was the script editor for it. Pretty good project. I've never heard anything negative about the documentary that we did, and go check it out. Definitely go check it out if you wanna see it. 3D printed guns, Cody Wilson in it and stuff, and yeah. But yeah, Tom TechLibre, he's very well versed in tech, Linux. Whenever I have like a Linux question, I'll go to him, and super excited to have him on. Before we get into this episode, though, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Presearch, decentralized crypto search engine. Don't get censored while you search. Get 50 pre for using our sign up link. Such a good project. There's so much you can do with it in terms of like advertising it and running nodes, and it's earning crypto just to search privately is way better than Google just destroying your privacy and using you. So definitely check that out. But to get started here, how you doing, Tom?
Great, Brandon. Thanks for having me back. I want to shout out Presearch too. I've been using that exclusively since I heard about it on the podcast. I'm really happy with the results, especially searching locally here in Peru or searching in it from anywhere in the world is a really nice feature they have on there. And I feel like I get way better results than I get from other search engines that shall not be named.
Yeah, definitely. I like how they do like different currencies and stuff too. Like when I look up Mexican peso to USD, very convenient feature that I used to have to only go to Google for. Now Presearch has it, so I no longer have to use Google for that. So pretty cool. Every day they add more and more stuff to it, so you kind of will lose the dependency for Google after a while. But I think Google Maps is pretty much the only Google feature that I'll occasionally use. I pretty much know my way around where I'm at right now, so I didn't even really use that. But when I'm in the States, I definitely have to revert to Google Maps. But how's Peru doing after the whole COVID thing? You guys are pretty much, I don't think you guys are wearing masks anymore. How's all that stuff?
Well, there's good and bad with it, especially from an agorist perspective. Peru had 956 days of medical martial law. Masks were required in the street. At first, the police were grabbing people who didn't have masks and holding them in the police stations or the comisarias. They tried very hard to get everybody to take the vaccines. And the outcome of that, the negative part of that tyranny, was that the political churn and the restrictions kind of wiped away the best economic period that Peru had since the era of guano in 1845 to 1865. And the economy is just now starting to recover. But from an agorist perspective, I think there's some really positive things about that. 80% of the Peruvian workforce is in the gray market. So it's very possible for you to work and carry out your life without having to deal with the 45% income tax rate, and you're able to deal with people even using barter and things like that. And that was always an aspect of Peruvian culture. Barter is actually anticipated in the Constitution here, and it's not a taxable transaction. So people in Peru do that. They call it treque, and it makes it easy to, number one, keep more money in your pocket, and number two, you have basically an entire society that's willing to collaborate on some level to keep the government out of your day-to-day transactions. So it's kind of like they tried to go for phase one communism, and we ended up pushing the border between phase two agorism and phase three agorism. I guess the negative part of that, the other side of that, is that's kind of led to a flight of foreign capital and foreign interest in investing in Peru. So it was difficult to get through that. I have a family, I have kids, and there was definitely an impact on them going through that. And my wife, basically, she was coerced into taking the vaccine. And I mean, I feel bad about that, but I can also understand her choice. So it was a really tough go for basically, pushing 2.5 years of their craziness. But the outcome of that is positive in people's mindset, kind of like in the English speaking world. They've lost their last little bit of faith that our leaders have our best interests at heart and should be involved in our day-to-day transactions.
Yeah, that's it's very interesting. Like, that's kind of why I'm not like too concerned about state power, the state clamping down on the people, because when they do that, there is like negatives in terms of like, white markets or the like legit, like quote unquote legitimate businesses, right? But you also see, with more tyranny, you see like more agorism too, and that's like, not only just to like avoid taxes and stuff, but like merely just out of survival. You see that a lot with like the Soviet Union and stuff like that. Now, like Mexico, I don't even really know anyone who like pays income tax. I'm not even sure what or if what the income tax, or if there's an income tax here, just because I'm not familiar with it. But everything that I've seen here has been pretty much like with cash. Cash is pretty much king in Mexico. There's stores that won't even take a card. So is that kind of the case? Like, a lot of cash is used in Peru. Is that kind of the case down there?
Yeah, I would say here cash is also king, especially I have a bakery and a pizza restaurant that I run as a dark kitchen. It's all delivery, or I sell bread consignment to bodegas, and that's all cash. What's happened in the last couple of years is that the banks here have started to roll out digital fiat wallets. And I mean, it's a copy of what you see with, for example, a Bitcoin Cash wallet, where you can scan a QR code or type in a wallet address and send money back and forth. So that's become hugely popular here. And it's basically, I think it's pretty safe to say that Peru is already in the CBDC system. And I think that realistically, from my perspective, that agorists are going to have to learn to be able to bridge between the actual physical economy and the CBDC system. Because, it's called Yape, or the other one is Plin. And here in Peru, those have become ubiquitous because all you need is your phone number. And you're basically set up with a electronic CBDC account, and you can send money back and forth with no transaction fees between your phones.
Now, are you sending the what's the Peruvian currency down there? Is that
It's
what you're sending? The lira, right?
It's the Nuevo Sol.
Oh, okay, Nuevo Sol, yeah.
And as far as I know, I don't think you can send dollars back and forth with those apps.
Okay, so you're just sending Peruvian currency back and forth,
right,
through those apps.
Yes.
How easy is it to? So it's pretty easy to convert that to crypto if you wanted to.
Yeah, it is. I mean, as far as crypto goes, legally, cryptocurrency is still considered an intangible in terms of taxes. So when you trade cryptocurrency, you are doing barter in legal terms in Peru. So that those transactions aren't taxable.
Nice.
And there are some decent crypto exchanges in South America. So you can, if you have cryptocurrency, you can, send it to the exchange and sell it into Argentine pesos or Chilean pesos or Peruvian Nuevo Sols, and then send that to your bank account. And then you have, so you can, if you know how to deal with the KYC system and bridging from a bank account to a digital wallet or something like that, or even to an ATM, it's fairly streamlined.
Now is cryptocurrency, is that kind of like well known down there, or because like in Mexico, cryptocurrency is not really all that well known. Well, I don't really ask anyone about it because as a gringo, I avoid like telling anyone about anything that could make like lots of money just for like future purposes. But also, nobody down here really accepts cryptocurrency at all. Nor do I know anybody who like trades it like they would in like Japan. Like I guess Japan's like one of the top countries for like cryptocurrency and stuff. I was just doing a podcast with Graham Smith that was pretty interesting. That should be released here pretty soon. But yeah, tell me about Peru and in the cryptocurrency aspect there.
Yeah, nobody is doing day-to-day transactions in cryptocurrency here. But, there was an influx of about 2 million people from Venezuela over just before COVID started. And a lot of them are aware of cryptocurrency, but they use it as a safe haven. And a lot of Peruvian people are aware of cryptocurrency, but they're not cryptocurrency users. They don't use it as a currency. They use it as a speculative store of value. So I think there's 1 or 2 Bitcoin ATMs in Lima, which is a city of 10 million people. It's a big city, and I would guess that that's probably one of the few places where you could just semi-anonymously or pseudo-anonymously change Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash into fiat. But according to the financial newspapers, a huge portion of, the millennial and Gen Z want cryptocurrency to be used as money here.
Tell me about like Peruvian culture. Like, is it, as an expat, is it easy to like be a resident of Peru? Like, what would you have to do in terms of that? Are they like, of course I'm familiar with like Latin American culture, but kind of give the audience a little sense of that.
Well, if you have a U.S. or Mexican passport, or if you're from any South American country, you can just enter with your regular ID. For people who just fly in as a tourist, you can ask for either a 90-day or a 180-day tourist visa. And as long as you go back to one of the immigration offices, you can renew your tourist visa, I think, like up to an entire year. If you want to get Peruvian residence, you have to have either a family connection or a job. And meet either of those 2 criteria are probably the most common ones. I mean, there are others where if you're a business investor or you've set up a LTD, or you're a member of a private corporation, then you can use that as a way to get a permanent residence visa. So here in Peru, it's very easy to come to Peru and stay here legally. The tourist visa, let's say if you stay for a whole year, you can just, and you want to renew beyond that, you can just go to Chile on vacation and come back in, and then you can continue to renew your tourist visa.
So basically, border hop real quick and renew that way.
Yes. If you don't renew your tourist visa, they can fine you. I've seen one guy that I worked with. He overstayed, I think, a year and a half, and he had to pay $2,000 to leave Peru. So if you overstay your visa, they charge you a certain amount each day for staying in Peru. But on the other hand, if you play by their rules, it's fairly easy to have either a nomadic tourist visa for as long as you want, or to find a path to get the resident card. Here it's called Carne of Extranjería, but it's basically a green card like you would have in the United States, and you can use that to open a bank account or get a job or anything like that. If you want to get citizenship here, you have to be checked out by Interpol. Make sure you're not on the Interpol most wanted list. Even people, for example, with some felonies can get Peruvian residence or citizenship, with the exception of rape, murder, and pedophilia. I think you're not even welcome to come into the country. So they're fairly easy pass to either permanent residence or citizenship if you want it, but you'll have to go through the citizenship process and swear to uphold the Constitution of 1993. Stuff like that. As far as business in Peru, it's fairly easy to open up a formal business in the formal economy. The biggest barriers to that are going to be the fact that you can't really deal or touch the Peruvian government without someone trying to get a bribe out of you. I've never interacted with the Peruvian government without someone trying to chisel me for money. The only exception was at the immigration offices here, but everybody else is on the take. I mean, from the traffic cop on the corner all the way up to the president, there's not a one of them who wouldn't, clip somebody for a few bucks. It's very pervasive, and I've just come to see it as not part of the indigenous culture here in Peru because they don't really like that, but it's something that is part of Roman law. It's common all over Latin America, and it is the way that the Roman Empire operated in Spain. It's the way the Empire of Spain operated. And so it's kind of ingrained into the formal culture here. The people in the highlands in the jungle have a very different cultural attitude. They don't operate on that kind of mindset, but instead you kind of have a unspoken social credit from the way that you behave and what you contribute to your nearer circles of your local culture. So in general, like for example, in Latin America or in Peru especially, you can't make a handshake deal with anybody who doesn't speak Quechua, in my experience, because it's not something that's part of their culture like English common law. So you have to have everything written down like a legal contract.
Just in terms of understanding the agreement, or what do you mean exactly?
So I think this is something that contrasts with culture in Mexico and culture in Peru. In Peru, even in formal business situations, people will lie and try and trick you, mainly in the coastal or Creole culture. Here in Peru, when you call your friend pendejo, they laugh because they think that's funny. Whereas when you call someone pendejo in Mexico, that's not a compliment.
Okay.
So the kind of being tricky or getting over on someone with a spoken word and handshake is a very common thing. And I think that kind of extends into, Ecuador and Chile as well. So in business dealings, or, you're going to have a contractor work on your house, or you're going to hire someone to work for you, or you're going to work for someone else, you want a piece of paper with their signature on it. And everything else is just kind of talk.
Tell me about the Nuevo Sol. Is it like a currency that has, inflated greatly, like the Mexican peso? Like in, I think it's 1994, the Mexican peso pretty much went through like hyperinflation, and ever since it's kind of been, uh, pretty disastrous currency. Now, recently, the Mexican peso has actually been like one of the better ones globally. Like in terms of COVID, pre-COVID to now, prices really haven't changed too much. They've gone up like slightly, but I mean, even when you look at the U.S. dollar in the last 5, 6 years, everything's double or triple the price in the United States now. So, the last couple of years, the Mexican peso has actually been one of the better ones. How has the Nuevo Sol been recently, and just as like you know, the history of that currency?
Well, this is the Nuevo Sol would be the third currency that Peru has had since the 1980s. And I think up until the mid 80s, the currency was El Sol. And that ended up getting inflated into oblivion. And they created a new currency called the Inti, which means sun in Quechua. That got inflated into oblivion. And then when Alberto Fujimori was president, he did what was called the Fuji shock. And they switched from the Inti to the Nuevo Sol. For most of the history of the Nuevo Sol, it's been between 3.25 per US dollar up to peaks of 4.25. But in recent years, it's been kind of stuck between 3.50, 3 soles and 50 centimos to a dollar to four soles per dollar. So externally, the currency has done pretty well. And what it is the central bank president here, I think his entire job is to hold up the US dollar. Internally, along with the damage done to the internal economy, the Peruvian government did something like the United States. They had bonuses that they were giving out to various different social groups during COVID, and the inflation here is pretty comparable to the United States. A lot of things are up about 30% since the beginning of COVID. So in Nuevo Sol terms, some of the things that really went up, eggs went from about 450 Nuevo Sols per kilo to now 1050 per kilo. So that's kind of the similar jump that they made in the United States percentage wise, just from what I've seen on the internet. And wages haven't kept up with that here either. So a lot of people are really feeling the pinch from the inflation. So I would say, compared to the Mexican peso, the internal economy here, the sol has really weakened. We've had internal inflation on just about everything at a pace that's noticeable. On a monthly or 2-month basis, you'll notice that things have gotten more expensive. And just last month, at the beginning of this month, I think mainly related to the inflation, about 40% of Peru is living below the poverty line. And of course, when I say poverty line in Peru, I mean between $3 and $10 a day. So that's not a great life, when you're trapped in that fiat money system and you get hit with that kind of inflation. It has a huge impact on people.
Yeah, I bet, definitely. What when I think of Peru, I guess I kind of I think of just like generally like Latin American culture. Like what separates Peru from, like, what makes Peru unique? Like what separates it from some of the other cultures in that area?
Well, Peruvians are really focused on their families. You have almost everyone lives in a multi-generational household, and a lot of decisions are made kind of at that multi-generational group discussion. At Sunday dinner, people will make those kind of decisions. So the family is a really strong basic unit of society here. Almost everyone has what I would have to characterize as kind of traditionalist Christian values. There's, compared to other places that I've been in Latin America, Peruvians have more of an aversion towards violence. And I admire them because they have a lot of, respect for the human condition. Initiation of violence is never acceptable here. But, you'll also see where, someone initiates violence and there's like an explosion of popular justice against them. I mean, people, if they catch you stealing here, God have mercy on your soul, because only the police can come and save you. They've had...
Yeah, theft can definitely, can definitely get you killed where I'm at. So don't come to Mexico and shoplift from somebody, or, take something that's not yours down here, because it can definitely get you killed. But yeah, that's interesting.
And then another big difference here in Peru is the influence of the Quechua speaking society, what used to be the Incan Empire, but really it's not just the Incan Empire. That was also like a federation of different tribes basically were controlled under the Incan Empire. But in Quechua, they have words and concepts that don't exist in English. And it makes a huge difference in the way that they perceive the world. A lot of people who are involved in agriculture here don't want any mining. They're not interested. They don't care if the wealth of all of the world is buried underneath the mountain where they grow potatoes. They don't care. They want to grow potatoes. They want to have their life the way it is, including, a lot of people that I know from the market or when I've been to the highlands. They've got a Nokia 3310 phone, and that's as much of the internet as they want to get involved in. So they have a different outlook that's a lot less materialistic. My kid's great uncle was kind of like that. He worked at a pasta factory his whole life, doing the maintenance on the pasta machines like that. He came to Lima from the highlands. He managed to buy a lot, build his house, do his career. And he wasn't ever interested in, becoming rich or anything like that. He still, when we would have a party or everything like that, and he opened up the first beer, he would pour some out to the mountain up above his house and say a prayer in Quechua and things like that. So Andean culture is still really strong, and it pervades almost everything here in Peru. So it's an interesting mix, because you have those kinds of values that I think actually, and the depth of the culture, the music, the folklore dancing, the family get-togethers on the weekends and things like that, have a really powerful influence on the way that people perceive the world around them. And they don't really, communism isn't a good fit here. And the mercantilism that we have in the formal economy isn't a good fit here, because the people are interested in not just, I want to sell all my potatoes and buy a new Toyota. They're thinking, I want to sell my potatoes this year and throw a really good wedding party for my son or daughter. So their priorities are, for a lot of people, are much different than what you might have from other countries that have maybe been more exposed to the quote unquote Western civilization.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think in a previous podcast we touched on like the agorist aspects of Peru. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Peru, like when you go to buy something here in Peru from a person who's running, I don't know, a small clothing store or a bodega or the stalls in the vegetable market, it's kind of expected that you try and offer a lower price and haggle with people for prices. And that depends a large part on if you're a customer who's been there before and they think that you're going to come back, they're going to try and give you a better deal. So people in Peru are aware that value is subjective, but they're also aware of what the fair market value of what they're selling is. So there aren't very many people in Peru who know about the concept of agorism, but there's almost no one in Peru who isn't, to at least some extent, an entrepreneur or a reseller or and looking at what's going on around them and trying to create a market. It's in the middle of COVID, you never had to worry if you didn't have a mask, because as soon as you went outside to any busy corner, there was someone there selling masks, because people just saw that was a market. And the same thing with, food. They tried to close down all the big farmers markets here. And within the first week of the lockdown through our neighborhood, guys would come on a tricycle motorcycle and you could get fruit. One guy was selling fruit. One guy was selling fish. Another guy came through a couple of times a week with literally an entire whole hog in the back of there and was cutting off joints of pork for people. So Peru is a very entrepreneurial country in that sense. So I think agorism here is strong too, because with 80% of people in the informal economy, the economy is actually recovering, at least internally. Prices have kind of stabilized, and in my neighborhood, there's 4 or 5 houses under construction now. So, and all of those are, off the books jobs. So I've been really pleased actually coming out of COVID to see the things that Samuel Edward Konkin talks about in the Agorist Primer line up really closely with being right in between phase 2 and phase 3 agorism, because the government here is weak. We've had 5 different presidents since the beginning of COVID with just one election. And Pedro Castillo, who won the election, is in jail right now for attempting to pull off a communist coup or power grab. So generally speaking, belief in the government is low. Belief in the government authority or their ability to guide our lives as they would like us to believe is low as well. And people's awareness of their economic situation is high. So it's agorism happening all the time, but without people, knowing about the theory of it, which I think makes good points about things you don't just see in Konkin's writings, but, Murray Rothbard as well, and Ludwig von Mises. And now, love him or hate him, Javier Milei has made a huge impact in South America. He's a South American politician, so I wouldn't trust him out of my sight, but he does have a good message, and he's actually making the moves that are awakening people to the fact that a lot of what goes on in the Peruvian economy should probably not be handled by the government. So overall, I'd say coming out of COVID, it's pretty positive as far as agorism goes, especially in, the Peru, Chile, Argentina. Bolivia is in the process of I think a collapse economically and politically.
Yeah, and interesting. Do you have to worry about gringo pricing in Peru? Like if they see a white guy, are they going to try to like charge them extra like they would in Mexico? Like I think a lot of Americans are like aware of that in terms of like Mexico, but it's like not as common as they believe, but it's still very prevalent. And certain things you've really got to be aware of in Mexico in terms of that. But like so definitely like don't always accept like the first offer and shop around before you buy and stuff like that, and maybe get like two or three opinions. That kind of helps with um in terms of like gringo pricing in Mexico, or like just getting into a taxi cab. Make sure that you negotiate the price before you get in. But how is that in Peru?
Well, it's definitely a thing in Peru. I mean, I've lived here for 20 years, so I'm very accustomed to that and I know how to deal with it. And I speak Spanish well enough to make it clear to people that, hey, I'm not a tourist, buddy. You know what I mean? But that attitude has made it difficult or impossible for me to interface with the officials here in some cases. So if you're just coming to visit, I mean, expect them to, if you're at a popular tourist site and you're buying a bottle of water, other people might pay 1 sol, but they're going to try and get you for, 2 sols. So that's definitely a thing. But by the same token, I grew up in Wyoming, and in Cheyenne, Wyoming, at the end of July is the world's largest rodeo, Frontier Days. Every restaurant in Cheyenne or Riverton or Lander or whatever, they have their menu for the locals and they have a higher price menu for tourist season. So it's not like that doesn't go on in the English speaking world, especially in tourist places. And it goes on here in Peru too. I mean, tourists are people on vacation and people want to tap into that additional opportunity. So you have to be aware of it. And like your advice was really good. I mean, here in Peru or in Mexico, if I'm going to buy something, I look on Mercado Libre. So I know what the top price and bottom price are before I go into it. But if I'm going to be buying something over and over again, groceries or, gasoline or anything like that, then I try and deal with the same people, find somebody that you can build a business relationship with. And when you do that here in Peru, you're going to get treated just like anybody else. So it's not like they don't hate gringos. Okay. You might find a lot of Peruvians who hate Venezuelans, but everybody in Peru is always happy to see a gringo coming, whether you're going to Machu Picchu or you're carrying your surfboard across the beach. People here are very friendly. And even if the person at the tourist spot tries to gouge you for 2 sols, if you're aware of that and you can joke with them about it, they'll come clean and probably drop the price. Or if you're willing to haggle with them, they'll drop the price for you. So it's definitely a thing. I mean, but I've never felt, oh my God, they're racist against gringos, I'm not going to be able to make it here. It was never anything to that extent. I always kind of just saw it as normal human opportunism.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, it's not racism. They're just like, hey, I can probably get more, and just by looking at the guy's skin, and you really can't blame them, especially if they're trying to survive or take care of their families. Definitely be aware of it, and be aware of like prices, and know that like in touristy areas, you're definitely probably going to be taken, because you're a tourist. But yeah, and again, like, I thought that was interesting how you're telling us about Cheyenne, Wyoming, like, even places in the U.S. do it. And it's not like as like prevalent in like movies and stuff as like the Latin American culture is, where, they do it in movies, but yeah, it's still there. Is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of like Peru, or even if you want to get into like technology? I know you're big on tech and stuff.
Yeah, I guess one last thing I'd say about that with gringo pricing in Peru. I think one thing that a lot of people who live in the United States miss out on is that here in Peru, if I go to the richest neighborhood in Lima, to Monterrico, I'm going to see people of every single skin color who live there and are rich. And in my middle class neighborhood, just on this block, there's every skin color you could imagine all mixed together. So there was never this, you're black, you go live on the other side of the railroad tracks, you're Latino, you go live over by the Catholic Church, or you're Irish, you go live next to the Latinos and keep them separated from the Chinese people. That never happened in Peru, or it was never successful. So the differences people have might be, one person is from Trujillo and their accent is a little bit different than someone from the jungle, and they'll know that, but there's not really a conflict between them. They don't see each other as, different races. And, when I go out in public or I meet somebody new here in Peru, they're going to call me gringo. And they're going to call their friend who's Afro-Peruano, they're going to call him negro. So the race war thing that's going on in the United States, I don't think it would even be possible to do something along those lines. So when you visit Peru, if you're aware of that, you get something offered at an overprice, it's not necessarily because of your skin color, because they're going to do that to the Japanese person right behind you too.
Yeah, the same thing in Mexico. Like they'll call somebody black or white or like fat or skinny. They just kind of like, if they don't like know the person's name or even friends, they'll just refer to them as like how they see them, like descriptive wise. Like it's not really like an insult or like racist or anything. It's just kind of like part of their culture. And to where like if you called like somebody fat in the US, they'd be like very offended and stuff like that. Or if you started like calling people by their color, that probably wouldn't be accepted in the US either. But like in Latin American, it's very, normal and stuff. A lot of people ask me about like the cartels and stuff in Mexico, and I don't really like talk about the cartels because I don't want anything to do with them. I stay like as far away as possible. Like I don't get involved. I don't even know of any cartel members. Um, I'm sure that there are like some around and stuff like that, but I don't know. I don't want to know. I don't get involved in it. It's not a part of like daily life as far as I know in Mexico. So how are the like drugs and gangs and maybe even cartels in Peru?
Well, when it comes to the big like narco cartel, in my opinion, the upper echelons of the police and the military are the cocaine cartel. And I think there might be some political parties, they're kind of involved in that, but you've never heard of a drug cartel from Peru because they're within the government. And I think they have been since Alberto Fujimori's second term in the mid 90s. And so when it comes to that kind of thing, you don't really have to worry about avoiding the cocaine cartel. The biggest impact on the average Peruvian's life is that the fact that they steal the kerosene and gasoline from the police and the military and use that to make the basic cocaine paste that they export. And most of that now is going down the Amazon River to the Orinoco River and to Venezuela or Colombia, and then on to Mexico. So you don't have large military groups who are, the cartel and the de facto government in particular areas like Mexico. Here, most of the crime is going to be what I can only characterize as, small time extortion rackets, loan sharking rackets, and prostitution. And, those things are all pretty easy to avoid, not get yourself involved in, don't borrow money from the Venezuelan or Peruvian gang, because you're never getting out of that debt. And that's kind of been a problem for a lot of people in the last few years. I would say that most of the violence that goes on here in Lima is related to turf battles between, small gangs, small groups, trying to control one of those three businesses in a particular area. So you have a lot of petty crime here in Peru, but you don't have any groups like the cartel who are going to come down with overwhelming force on a competitor or someone they view as cutting into their business. But you do have, pickpockets. I don't know, some stick up people, but that's pretty easy to avoid too, because they're not going to be able to do stick ups on people if you're, at a busy bus stop or something like that, because there'll be that public backlash. So overall, I would say it's a little bit better. The problem is that the cocaine business is a contentious issue in the media. Everyone who's involved in what the media sees as the cocaine business is labeled as a communist terrorist or a narco terrorist. And then when they do catch, a high level military officer, police officer who's embezzling petroleum to make cocaine, that kind of gets swept under the rug real quickly. So it's kind of endemic. I guess the bad part is the taxpayers are picking up the tab for that. And the good part is that it is a much lower level of violence and competition in that black market. But, in most places, like in my neighborhood, you're perfectly fine to be, wandering around outside it or going for a walk in the early morning or late at night, partly because of the Peruvian attitude towards popular justice. So I would say it's a little bit safer. The murder rate here is fairly low. I think it's only like 14 for 100,000. So it's never been like El Salvador used to be, or, like the reputation that Mexico has. It's pretty chill when it comes to that.
Yeah, that interesting for sure. Man, I really appreciate all the great perspectives and things that you're telling us. Is there anything else you want to tell us about Peru, or maybe even like if you want to go over like some tech tips or whatever before we wrap this thing up?
Yeah, sure. I guess I've been a Linux user on all my home computers and my family's computer since about 2005. So I highly recommend everybody try out Linux. It's not as easy to use as Windows or something else like that, and you will eventually have to use the terminal to use Linux. But as we go into this era of CBDCs and Microsoft and Google installing AI onto all of your devices, I can recommend to everybody now, Manjaro is a really great Linux distribution. My sons use it, and, they're kind of still novice power users, but, it can be installed by anybody with a little bit of reading. As far as on like the Linux front, there have been huge advances with the Linux kernel being able to work with almost, any Wi-Fi card. There's a new sound system called Pipewire that's coming out if you're in the audio or recording business that looks like, I'm using it right now, and it's pretty solid. And it works fairly well. And then, of course, another thing a lot of people do with gaming, the advent of the Steam Deck, which runs on Manjaro, has meant that there's a big push, even with the AAA game publishers, to have their game be able to run on Linux. And for your average gamer, you're going to pick up a nice performance bonus from your RAM that you have installed, your video card, and your CPU by switching to Linux. A typical bare bones Linux installation is going to run on 1 or 2 gigabytes of RAM. So compared to what you get with the other, legacy operating systems, it's really important now for people to start to understand the 4 software freedoms, that you can read the code that's running on your electronic devices, that you can share that code with people, that you can edit the code and create something new out of the code that's running on your computer. Because I see that misunderstanding that people have about what it really means. Free software doesn't mean it doesn't have a cost. Free software, as in Libre, you can do what you want with it, is going to become a really important life skill for people in the future if you want to be able to do anything on the internet or with computing devices that isn't surveilled by someone. No serious business outside of the United States should have Microsoft Windows installed on a computer where they're putting their business details. And in a lot of countries, that's become passé. The Brazilian government is all free software. They use LibreOffice format documents to send things back and forth because they've experienced several times Microsoft giving their business secrets to their American competitors and the American intelligence organizations. And I think going forward, you're going to have a situation where you've got your CBDC wallet on your telephone. And if you're an agorist, you want to not have that spilling over and revealing every single private detail about your finances or your business or your personal life through those pieces of software that you have to have on some device. And only by using Linux or BSD or something like that are you going to be able to firewall global communism from your personal finances and personal life. So if you're not using Linux, or you've never tried it out, or you don't know about flashing a telephone, those are all things to consider. And there are people out there who I've heard, for example, on Free Thought Project with the Above Phone, and the Vanu podcast with their Ghost laptop. I mean, those are all ideas that everybody should be familiar with, because you don't want to be learning that kind of stuff in an emergency situation. So I guess that's my sales pitch for Linux and free software, and why it's going to become really, really important, because I don't think, especially in light of COVID, I don't think we're just going to opt out of the CBDCs and increasing tyranny. We're going to have to learn to live in that context and understand that technology isn't always our friend, and human beings are of a nature where our first technology, fire, we discover fire on Monday and we cook our food with it, and by Wednesday we're burning down the neighboring village. So those are the kind of things that can really actually happen, and being able to stay away from the village burners in your electronic life is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's pretty much all the time we got. Yeah, I mean, in this future world that we see, we're just going to see government become more tyrannical. We're really just living in like a one world government, where countries are merely just states for this one world government, and they're really just puppets. And it's all, when they go to war with each other, they disagree with each other. It's mostly just like political theater, or some kind of like agenda that pulls the some kind of agenda for the one world government at the end of the day. So yeah, I'm going to wrap it up here with a quote. Government is an association of men who do violence to the rest of us. Leo Tolstoy. Gorsnex is out.
I'm plugged into the Agorist nexus. We need the whole community connected. We're the alternative collective. Self-sufficient and effective. Pull the rug from